My hands were not shaking. That's the part nobody believes when I tell them. And I've told them. I've told the lawyer. I've told my mother. I've told 3 different friends who all had the same reaction. That sharp intake of breath, the hand over the mouth, the eyes going wide. And every single time, before I get to anything else, they stop me and they say, "Weren't you shaking?" No, I was not shaking. The candles were lit, the tall white ones I keep for holidays, the ones that drip wax onto the silver holders my grandmother gave me when I got married. The good plates were out. The ones that only come out 4 or 5 times a year. The ones with the thin gold rim that you can't put in the dishwasher. 22 people were wedged around the table my father built, and they were waiting for the lasagna to cool, and I was standing at the head of my own dining room holding my phone with both hands, and I want you to understand this clearly. My hands were not shaking. I cleared my throat. The sound was small, barely anything, but in that room, in that moment, it was enough to make people look up from their wine glasses. My mother smiled. She thought it was a toast. That's the kind of woman she raised me to be. The one who makes little speeches at family gatherings, who remembers to say thank you out loud, who frames everything as a celebration. She was already raising her glass. Her lipstick was the color she always wore to my grandmother's Sunday dinners. She was smiling at me with the warmth of a woman who believed completely and totally that I was about to say something beautiful. Across the table, my husband's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He didn't put it down. He just stopped, like a film that freezes on a single frame. The fork in the air, the food on it, his eyes moving to my face with an expression I had seen before but never understood until that exact second. That look wasn't surprise, it was calculation. He was already doing the math. And my sister? My sister set down her wine. She set it down carefully, both hands on the glass, lowering it to the tablecloth with the kind of care you use when you know something fragile is nearby. And she looked at me. And for just a half second, less than that, a fraction, something moved across her face that she couldn't control. She knew. She already knew what was coming, and she set her wine down and she looked at me, and I looked back at her, and I thought, 35 years. I have known you for every single day of your life. I taught you to ride a bike in this driveway. I helped you study for every exam that mattered. I held your hand in the hospital when you had that scare at 24, the one we never told Mom about. 35 years, and you sat at my table and ate my food and looked at my husband across the lasagna and thought you were invisible to me. I scrolled to the first message. The one from a Tuesday afternoon in March. A Tuesday. I'll come back to Tuesdays. I read his name. I read her name. And then I read the words he sent her at 2004 in the afternoon, 2:14 on a Tuesday in March, while I was alone in a small room at my obstetrician's office, lying on a paper-covered table with cold gel on my stomach, watching the black and white flutter of a heartbeat on a screen. While I was watching that heartbeat, while I was crying at that heartbeat, he was writing to her. The room went so quiet I could hear the candles burning. That sound, that faint, steady hiss of flame against wax, was the loudest thing in the room. I kept reading. I am going to tell you everything, and I need you to stay with me because this story doesn't end where you think it ends. It doesn't end at the table. It doesn't end with the texts or the phone calls or even the lawyer. It ends somewhere else entirely, somewhere I didn't expect, somewhere quiet and mine and permanent. I'm also going to be honest with you in a way that most people aren't when they tell stories like this. I'm not going to tell you I was perfect. I'm not going to tell you I handled every moment with grace. There were days I sat in my car in the parking lot before work and held the steering wheel until my hands stopped feeling like someone else's hands. There were nights when the house felt so large and so quiet that I had to turn on every lamp just to feel like I was in a real place. But I kept going, and the keeping going is the point. You don't get to walk away from a story like this. Neither did they. Let me back up. Because before there was a dining room with good plates and a phone and a silence you could drown in. Before any of that, there was just a girl who loved her family more than she had words for. My name for tonight is Elena. I am 38 years old. I grew up in a house that was loud and warm and imperfect in all the ways that leave marks on you. My father worked with his hands. My mother worked with her hands too, in a different way, cooking, cleaning, making something out of nothing at the end of every month when the money ran thin. They weren't bad people. They were tired people, and tired people fight. I was the eldest. That means I knew things before I was supposed to know them. I knew when the electricity bill was late because my mother's voice changed when she answered the phone. I knew when my father had a bad week at work because he'd sit in the kitchen after dinner just a little too long, turning his coffee cup in circles. I became, very early, the kind of child who reads rooms, who knows how to make things feel lighter than they are. And then, when I was 9 years old, my sister was born. I remember the hospital. I remember being brought in by my grandmother, my mother's mother, a small woman who smelled like lavender and kept hard candies in her coat pocket, and led to the window of the nursery. And I remember looking at this red-faced, squinting, entirely unimpressed-looking baby wrapped in a yellow blanket and feeling something happen in my chest, something that didn't have a name yet, something that just meant mine, Carla. I know you've heard of sibling love. I'm not going to tell you it was perfect. We had the same fights every family has. She borrowed my clothes without asking. She told a boy I liked in 6th grade that I had a crush on him, and I didn't speak to her for 2 weeks. She had this way, when she was a teenager, of being the one who needed saving from every situation she had personally created, and somehow still being surprised when the situation turned bad. She was also... I need to say this, because it's true and because the story doesn't make sense without it. She was also brilliant in ways that people didn't always see right away. She could walk into a room full of strangers and in 20 minutes know everyone's name and their coffee order and the thing they were most proud of. She had the kind of warmth that doesn't feel performed, the kind that makes you feel like you're the most interesting person in any room because she was genuinely interested in you. Teachers loved her. Neighbors loved her. She collected people the way some people collect things, carefully, with attention, knowing their value. She collected David, eventually. I understand that now, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But there was something underneath all of that, a bedrock, a thing that didn't move. When I was 12 and she was 9, our parents had the worst fight I ever witnessed. I don't remember what started it. I remember the volume of it. Voices bouncing off walls, a door slamming so hard a picture fell in the hallway. I remember grabbing Carla's hand and pulling her into the bathroom and locking the door. I turned the water on so she wouldn't hear. I made up stories, just invented them on the spot, one after another, sitting on the cold bathroom tile with her head on my shoulder until the shouting stopped. She fell asleep like that. I sat there with my back against the tub until I heard my father's car back out of the driveway. She never thanked me for that night. She didn't have to. It wasn't about thanks. It was just about, someone has to do this, and I am the one who knows how. The summer before I left for college, Carla was 15. She came into my room the night before I left. I was packing, pulling things off my shelves, the sad archaeology of leaving a place you've lived your whole life, and she sat on the edge of my bed and watched me for a while without saying anything. Then she said, "Who's going to do the music thing when I need it?" I stopped packing. I sat down next to her. I said, "You're going to do it yourself. You know how." She said she didn't. I said she did. We sat there for another hour, not really talking, and at some point she fell asleep on my pillow and I finished packing around her, carefully, without waking her up. That's the version of her I carried for 35 years. The one who fell asleep on my pillow the night before I left. The one who needed the music turned up. I built my whole idea of her around that version. Which is part of why what I eventually found hit me the way it did. Not as the discovery of a stranger, but as the discovery of a person I thought I'd been reading correctly my entire life. For 35 years, I was that person for her. When she was 17 and got her heart broken for the first time. A boy named Marcus, a junior, someone she built entire futures around in her head. She didn't call her friends. She came to my apartment at 11 at night and knocked until I answered. I made her tea. I let her say everything that needed saying. I didn't tell her Marcus wasn't worth it because she wasn't ready to hear it yet. I just sat with her in the ugly part, the part before things start to feel better, and I stayed there as long as she needed me to. What she said to me that night, at some point around 2 in the morning when the tea was cold, "You're the only person I can say anything to." And I'd said, "I know, that's what I'm here for. I meant it completely. I still mean it, even now. The tragedy isn't that I was wrong to mean it. The tragedy is that I was the only one who did. That's who we were. When I got married, I was 32 years old. I had been with David for 6 years by then, and everyone who knew us had expected a wedding for at least 4 of those 6. I wasn't in a rush. I wanted to be sure. Not of him. I had been sure of him almost from the beginning, but of myself, of what I was building, of whether I was building it for the right reasons. The wedding was in October. Small by some standards. 60 people. A restaurant we loved in the neighborhood. My grandmother's plates brought in because I am my mother's daughter, and I cannot do a significant meal on plates that don't mean something. Carla was my maid of honor. She gave a speech that made everyone cry. She talked about the bathroom floor, the music, the stories I'd made up. She said, Elena has been teaching me to be brave since before I knew what brave meant. The room was very quiet when she said it. I was already crying by the second sentence. I thought about that speech a lot, in the weeks after everything fell apart. About how much of what she said was true, and how much of what was true she'd already started to make complicated even then. I don't know when it started. That's the honest answer. I don't know if it started before or after the wedding. I know that at the wedding, when Carla danced with David during the open floor, I watched them and felt something that I immediately categorized as happiness. They looked like a family. They looked like what I'd hoped for. What I couldn't see from where I was standing was what they looked like to each other. David. Let me tell you about the man I married. I met him at a friend's backyard barbecue on a Saturday in July. He was the one who had volunteered to grill, which sounded impressive until you watched him do it. He burned everything. 3 rounds of burgers, 4 rounds of apologies. He apologized to each person individually. He apologized to the host. He apologized to the grill, which made someone laugh, which made everyone laugh, and then he looked over at me, across a yard full of people, and made a face like, yes, this is my life, isn't it? I laughed. I married him because he was steady, not in a boring way. In a way that felt like ground underneath your feet, something you could build on. He remembered the names of my coworkers. He remembered how I took my coffee on different kinds of days. When my father got sick, a cardiac event, the doctors called it, a careful word for something that scared all of us badly. David sat in the hospital hallway for 3 consecutive nights, not because I asked him, because he looked at me and understood without being told that I needed someone there who wasn't also afraid. He was that person. Or I thought he was. I want to be honest with you about something before I keep going. I want to tell you that I had no idea, that there were no signs. That I was blindsided completely and totally without warning. But that would be a lie. And I promised myself this story would be true. There were signs. There were always signs. I just chose to read them differently, because when you love 2 people and they love each other, you tell yourself a particular story. You say, I am lucky. My husband and my sister are best friends. How many women can say that? I said it with pride. I said it at dinner parties. I said it to my mother. I want you to hold on to that, the pride I felt. Because pride, I've learned, is exactly the kind of feeling people with something to hide are counting on. It started the way these things always start. Small, invisible, deniable. David began fixing things at Carla's apartment. Her car, first. Then a leaking faucet she'd mentioned at Christmas dinner. Then the lock on her back door that stuck. He would announce these projects casually. I'm going over to help Carla with her car this weekend, and I would think, how wonderful, he's being a brother-in-law. This is what I wanted. Carla began bringing David coffee, not at her place, at ours. She'd arrive for Sunday dinner with a cup from the place 2 blocks from her apartment, made exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, no milk. A detail so specific that I remember the first time I noticed it, she didn't even look at me when she handed it to him. It was automatic, practiced. I taught her to make coffee the way he liked it, or so I told myself. The group chat started, little ones at first. The 3 of us on a thread about Thanksgiving plans, about my mother's birthday, about a restaurant recommendation. Then I started noticing a slight pause before either of them replied to me in the chat. A hesitation I couldn't name, like a conversation interrupted, inside jokes I didn't catch. I'd walk into the kitchen and they'd be laughing and one of them would say, you had to be there, and I would smile, because what else do? You smile, you say tell me, and they give you the short version that isn't funny because it wasn't ever about the story. It was about the fact that they were there. Together. Without me. I filed all of it under, I have a good family. I filed it there because I needed it to go somewhere that didn't scare me. And for years it stayed there, quiet, contained. The way things do, right up until they don't. 8 months before Marisol texted me, I was 26 weeks pregnant. I know the exact number because I had just gotten back from an appointment. A regular one. Nothing urgent, nothing alarming, just the routine of it. Blood pressure, measurements, a conversation about iron levels. I called David from the parking garage. His phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I wasn't worried. He was probably in a meeting. I called Carla. Same thing, 4 rings, voicemail. I drove home, made lunch, ate it standing at the kitchen counter because I was tired in the specific way. Pregnancy makes you tired, not sleepy, but like your body is carrying something heavier than just weight. I was washing my plate when both of them called back. David first, by maybe 40 seconds. Carla 30 seconds after that. I remember thinking, funny timing. And then I thought nothing more of it. That night at dinner, David mentioned that Carla's landlord was being difficult about a maintenance request. A specific detail, the hot water heater in her building, a part that had been on order for 3 weeks. A detail that hadn't come up in any family conversation I'd been part of. A detail I hadn't told him. I looked at him across the dinner table. "How do you know about her hot water heater?" I asked. I nodded. "I speared a piece of chicken. I filed it under, they talk. That's fine. I wanted them to be close, but something that had no name yet sat down next to that memory and refused to leave. Not suspicion, not yet. Something quieter than suspicion. Something that sits in the back of your throat and doesn't hurt exactly, but makes it slightly harder to breathe. Something that makes you more careful with your breathing without knowing why. I became, in those months, slightly more careful with my breathing. I didn't notice that consciously until much later. Until I was reading through 3 years of messages on a phone that wasn't mine, and I thought, I've been bracing for this since October. My body knew before my mind was ready to know. 2 weeks after that, I was at a family dinner at my parents' house. One of those big, loud Saturday meals where everyone arrives at different times and the food gets cold and someone always ends up crying over something that has nothing to do with what started the conversation. Normal. Ours. My cousin, Renata, she'd come with her new husband, mentioned a restaurant, a small Italian place in the neighborhood I didn't know well. She said she'd seen it reviewed and asked if anyone had tried it. My sister glanced at David. It lasted less than a second. His eyes went to the tablecloth. Hers went back to Renata. "Not me," Carla said. "Us either," David said. And then the conversation moved on and someone passed the bread and I sat there with that half-second look in my chest like a stone that had been dropped in still water, watching the ripples spread and telling myself, you're imagining things. You're pregnant and tired and your hormones are doing what pregnancy hormones do. You are not imagining things. You're just looking for problems because you're afraid. I was afraid. I was 6 months pregnant and I was afraid. But here's the thing about being afraid. Being afraid and being wrong are not the same thing. Sometimes fear is just knowledge that arrived before you were ready to call it that. I wasn't imagining anything. The message from Marisol came on a Thursday in March. I remember because Thursdays were my long days. 2 meetings in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, 45 minutes of commuting each way on a train that was always 5 degrees too warm. Then the grocery store because I'd missed my Tuesday run. The week had collapsed in the particular way weeks do when you're pregnant and working and trying to hold 17 things together at once. Then home, to a house that always had one light left on, always the one in the living room, the lamp by the couch that David turned on out of habit even when he knew I'd be late. I was in the kitchen, bags on the counter. One hand bracing the small of my back, the way you do when you're 7 months pregnant and you've been on your feet since 7 in the morning. My phone was in my coat pocket and I felt it buzz and I almost didn't look. Almost. Marisol. A name I recognized, barely. Carla's best friend since high school. We'd met 5 times, maybe 6. She'd been at my wedding, somewhere in the back of the photos, a face I associated with a green dress and a generous laugh. I had her in my phone because we'd been in a group chat once for Carla's birthday, and her name had just stayed there. The message was 6 lines. Elena, I'm sorry to do this over text, but you deserve to know and nobody else is going to tell you. I've been sitting on this for 3 months and I can't keep pretending I don't see it. Please don't tell Carla it was me. I'm sorry. And then 4 screenshots. I want to tell you what happened in my body when I opened the first one. I want to tell you because I think it matters. Because the way we expect women to react to this kind of news is with tears, with screaming, with plates thrown against walls. That's the version in movies, the hysterical woman, the falling apart. That is not what happened to me. What happened was silence, internal silence, the kind you've never noticed before because it's never been that quiet inside you, like everything, every thought, every current, every small background noise of being a person, went still at the same time. I sat down on the kitchen floor, slowly. One hand on my stomach, the way you do when the world tilts and you need to make sure the most important thing is safe. The towel was cold through my jeans. The bags were still on the counter. The ice cream I'd bought was already starting to sweat. I read the first screenshot. It was a conversation between Carla and Marisol. Carla writing about David. Not about her brother-in-law the way she always spoke of him in front of me. Your husband, David, him, but about David. Just David. Like there was only one person the word could refer to. I know it's wrong. But he's the only person who actually gets me. Not in a basic way, in a real way. I think he might be my soulmate. I've never said that out loud before. It feels strange to say it. It also feels true. I read it 3 times. Soulmate. That word. I want to stay there for a second because that word is doing a lot of work. A soulmate isn't someone you're attracted to. Anyone can be attracted to someone. A soulmate is a story. It's a decision. It's the word people use when they've already decided that what's happening is meaningful enough to keep. When they've named it something sacred. My sister used the word soulmate about my husband while I was carrying our child. I opened the second screenshot, a photo. Carla had sent it to Marisol, a photo of her and David at a restaurant I didn't recognize. Tuesday afternoon light, the specific gold of it, the way the light comes through windows in the middle of the day when most people are somewhere else. 2 plates, 2 glasses of water, his hand near hers on the table, not holding it, just near it, the way hands end up near each other when you stop being careful. The caption Carla wrote underneath, "Our lunch. Don't say anything, it's just ours. The third screenshot was Marisol asking, "Does Elena know you two are this close?" And Carla answering, "Elena's in her own world. Honestly, she's so wrapped up in the pregnancy, she doesn't notice anything anymore. David says it too. I put the phone face down on the tile. I didn't throw it, I didn't stand up, I just turned it over slowly and pressed it flat against the floor, and I sat there with my back against the kitchen cabinets, and I watched a small white river form where the ice cream was melting through the bag. The fourth screenshot I couldn't read yet, I just couldn't. I left it for later. I sat on that kitchen floor for 22 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock on the microwave when I finally got up. 22 minutes. The ice cream was gone, the bags were still on the counter. And I understood, somewhere that didn't require thought to access, that nothing in my life was going to look the same after this. I put the groceries away. I made dinner. I want you to understand what I'm saying when I say that. I put every single item away in its correct place. I made pasta with the sauce I'd bought, the good kind with the green lid, and I set the table, and when David came home 40 minutes later, I was standing at the stove and I said hello, and he said smells good, and we had dinner together like a completely normal married couple on a completely normal Thursday evening. He talked about a project at work, something about a timeline moving up. I asked questions, the right questions, follow-up questions, the kind that show you were listening. He told me about a colleague who'd been difficult, and I said, "That sounds frustrating," and he said exactly, and we finished dinner, and he loaded the dishwasher, and I wiped down the counter, and we watched television for an hour and then went to bed. And I lay next to him in the dark, in the bed we'd shared for 11 years, and I thought, wait, I needed to wait. Not because I wasn't sure, I was sure. The certainty of it had been sitting in my chest since the kitchen floor, solid and cold, not going anywhere. I needed to wait because I needed more. I needed to understand the shape of it. How long, how deep, how much. I needed to know what I was actually dealing with before I decided what to do with it. So I waited. He fell asleep the way he always fell asleep, quickly, completely, without ceremony. 1 minute present and the next minute gone, his breathing evening out into something slow and steady. I waited another 15 minutes past that. Then I turned on my side very slowly and I picked up his phone from the nightstand. I knew the code, our wedding anniversary. He'd said it when we got together and never changed it, and that detail. The fact that he felt safe enough to keep using our anniversary as the password to his private life nearly broke something in me right there in the dark. But I held it together. I had work to do, the text thread with Carla. I don't know what I expected. Something furtive maybe, something that would be easy to dismiss. The occasional joke, the harmless check-in, the thing you could almost explain away with enough goodwill. What I found was a relationship. The thread went back 3 years, not months, years. Daily. Good morning at 7 a.m. Consistently 7 a.m., I checked, before he'd even turned over to say good morning to me. Good night after I was asleep. The rhythm of 2 people who had organized their days around communication with each other. Photos. His lunch. Not in a reporting way, in a sharing way, the way you send someone a photo of your meal when you want them to feel like they're there with you. Her new haircut, sent to him before, as far as I could tell, she'd shown anyone else. A sunset she'd seen from her window, a book she was reading, his coffee. Her cat. A running count of our Tuesdays. 47, I counted them. 47 Tuesday lunches, spread across 3 years, billed to our joint account as client lunch or business meeting or sometimes nothing at all, just a charge at a restaurant mid-afternoon. 47, voice notes I couldn't play without waking him. I could see them. Little audio waveforms, 20 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, sitting in the thread like locked rooms. His voice, going somewhere I wasn't allowed. I counted 17 voice notes over the past year alone. 17 times he'd chosen to speak rather than type, because speaking is more intimate, because a voice carries something text doesn't, because he'd wanted her to have that. I kept scrolling. There were things in those messages I've never repeated out loud. Things too specific. The kind of intimate knowledge that only exists between two people who have been allowed very close, and he had taken it and carried it somewhere else. He'd told her things about our private life. Not just complaints, specific things. The way I sound when I'm half asleep, something I'd said in my sleep once that he found funny enough to repeat 3 months later. What I cried about in the shower after we lost a pregnancy that didn't hold, the one I've never spoken about publicly, the quiet grief of it that I thought was ours. He had told her about that. She'd responded, "She's lucky she has you." I put the phone down after that one and stared at the ceiling for a long time. There was a message from about 18 months ago where she'd written, "Sometimes I feel like I know you better than she does." And he'd written back, "That's because you actually listen." You actually listen. I need you to sit with that phrase for a second, because it's doing something very specific. It's not just flattering her, it's defining me by my absence. It's saying, what you give me is the thing she can't. It turns 14 years of a marriage into evidence of a deficit. It turns me into someone who was present but not really there. I picked the phone back up. I found the messages about me. I want to be careful here about how I tell you this part, because what I'm about to describe is the part that didn't make me sad. It made me cold. There's a difference. Sadness wants comfort. Cold wants information. And I was very, very cold. They laughed at me, not occasionally, not in the dark humor way that everyone talks about the people they love sometimes, consistently, affectionately even. The way you laugh at someone you decided is beneath you, at how I took everything so seriously. At a dress I'd worn to his work party, he'd described it to her in detail and she wrote back sounds very her, and then a laughing emoji. At the face I make when I'm frustrated, he'd apparently described it more than once, each time with enough detail that she recognized the reference. He told her about the ultrasound. That's the one. That's the message I came back to, the one I read 4 times, 5 times, pressing the phone harder than I needed to against my palm. He'd been there. He'd been in that room with me. I'm going to tell you about that room. This is important. He'd been standing beside me when the technician moved the wand and the screen shifted and suddenly there was a heartbeat on it. A real one. Small and impossibly fast like a hummingbird's wings. And I'd cried. I just started crying the way you cry when something you've hoped for a long time finally becomes real, without drama, just tears. He'd been holding my hand, and that same week he told Carla about it. Not tenderly. He described me crying as a lot his word, and she'd written back, she cried? At an ultrasound? And then, she's exhausting. You're a saint, my husband, a saint for tolerating the woman carrying his child. I scrolled until the sun came up. I want you to understand that I did not cry that night, not once. I kept waiting for it, that moment when the reality would break the surface and I would feel it the way they tell you you're supposed to feel it. It didn't come. What came instead was a kind of terrible clarity. The clarity you get when you've been told you're imagining something for long enough and then you find out you were right the whole time. I read everything. I read it the way you read something you know will matter later, carefully, completely, committing it to memory. Because some part of me already knew there would be a test, that whatever I did next would require knowing exactly what I was working with. At 5:47 in the morning, I put his phone back on the nightstand. I went to the bathroom and washed my face. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment, not for dramatic effect, just for the practical reason that I needed to know what I looked like, what I was working with. My face looked like my face. I went to work. I smiled at people. I bought a coffee and held the cup with both hands, partly for the warmth and partly because I needed them steady. I sat in 3 meetings that day. In every single one of them, I listened, I contributed, I took notes in my specific handwriting on the yellow legal pad I always used. My colleague asked me at lunch if I was feeling all right, and I said yes, just a little tired, pregnancy tired, you know how it is. She said she knew how it was and went back to her salad, and I went back to mine, and the conversation moved on. Nobody knew. Not one person in that office building could have looked at me across a conference table and seen what I was carrying. That used to be a thing I did unconsciously, containing myself, performing normalcy, smoothing the surface so the underneath stayed private. That day, for the first time, I did it deliberately. I chose it. Because I had a plan forming, and plans require time, and time requires patience, and patience requires a face that gives nothing away. I was good at the face. I had been good at the face my whole life. I just hadn't known until that moment that I was also good at using it strategically. I had the truth now. The question was what to do with it. Here's what I do for work. I coordinate financial reporting for a mid-sized nonprofit. I've been doing it for 9 years. It means I am, by professional necessity, very comfortable with spreadsheets. I am comfortable with numbers. I notice when they don't match. The day after I found the texts, I came home and I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and I opened our joint bank account. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was looking for the shape of things. The way you look at a landscape when you're trying to understand the terrain before you decide where to walk. The charges were there, 43 charges. Over 3 years, to restaurants I'd never heard of, categorized as business lunch or left blank, amounts between $30 and $90, all of them on Tuesdays. I cross-referenced them with the message thread. The count of our Tuesdays in the text was 47. I had 43 charges. The other 4? I checked the cash withdrawal history, were 4 separate cash withdrawals of $60 each, spread across the same 3 years. David never used cash. He hadn't used cash, as far as I could tell from our records, for anything except those 4 lunches. He'd paid cash on the days he'd wanted no record at all. That's when I felt it. Not the sadness, still not that, but something else. Something I can only describe as the sensation of a floor dropping out. Not because of the money itself. 43 restaurant lunches is not a financial catastrophe. It's a few $1,000s over 3 years. It's the choice. The 4 times he looked at the bill and thought, not this time. This time I don't want a record. That's not infatuation. That's not a friendship that got complicated. That's someone who knows exactly what they're doing and does it anyway and covers their tracks on the days the tracks feel too dangerous to leave. But then I found the transfer, March of last year. A single transfer from our joint savings account to an account I didn't recognize. $3,200. The memo line said, helping out. I pulled up every document we'd shared about our finances in the past year. There was no mention of a loan. No conversation I could find. No email, no text between us. I went to Carla's texts on my own phone, the thread between us, the sister's thread, and searched for borrowing money and help. Nothing. He had given my sister $3,200 without telling me, from our savings. From the account we'd opened together 11 years ago, the one we called the future, as a joke that stopped being a joke somewhere along the way. I sat with that for a long time. Long enough that the room got dark around me and I hadn't turned the lights on. The 4th screenshot from Marisol. The one I hadn't been able to open yet. I opened it now. It was Carla, 2 months ago, writing to Marisol. 3 sentences. I know this has to stop. I know it. I just don't know how to want it to stop when being with him is the only time I feel like myself. The only time she felt like herself. With my husband. I closed the laptop. I placed my hands flat on the table. I sat in the dark kitchen for a while, just breathing. And then I made a spreadsheet. I didn't confront David that night. Or the next night. I waited 3 days. People asked me about that. They asked how I did it, how I sat across the dinner table from him for 3 days without saying anything, without letting him see it. And the honest answer is, I'd been doing it for years. I just hadn't known that's what I was doing. I'd been swallowing things I couldn't name and calling them nothing and going back to the table. I was very practiced at this. But these 3 days were different. These 3 days were not avoidance. They were preparation. The first day, I built the timeline. It started as a spreadsheet. Dates, message contents, bank charges, restaurant names. But it became something more than a spreadsheet. It became a map of 3 years of my life redrawn. Every Tuesday I remembered him being busy. I placed it on the map. Every time Carla had arrived at a family dinner with a specific energy around her, a warmth directed at him, a joke that came too easily. I placed it. Every moment I'd filed under, I'm imagining things was now filed differently. The spreadsheet had 11 pages by midnight. I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house with my laptop open and my decaf going cold beside me, and I'd built the case that I already knew was true, the way you sometimes have to hold the proof in your hands before your heart will believe what your mind already knows. The second day, I called the bank. Not for large amounts. I wasn't expecting large amounts. I was looking for the Tuesdays. And there they were, 43 charges, spread across 3 years, restaurants I didn't recognize, all mid-afternoon, all on Tuesday. I did the math, an average of $38 per lunch. 2 people. A bottle of water, an entree each, maybe a dessert. The meals of 2 people who were comfortable enough to linger. 4 Tuesdays had no card charge. 4 cash withdrawals of $60 each. The only cash David had taken out of the ATM in 4 years, other than for Christmas tips. He paid cash on the 4 Tuesdays. He'd been most careful. And then I found the transfer. $3,200 from our savings 11 months ago to an account I didn't recognize. The memo said helping out. 2 words. The kind of memo you write when you can't say the real thing. I sat with that for a long time. The 3rd day, I read the 4th screenshot again, the one I hadn't been able to open the night Marisol texted me, the one I'd turned face down on the kitchen tile. Carla writing to Marisol, I know this has to stop. I know it. I just don't know how to want it to stop when being with him is the only time I feel like myself, the only time she felt like herself. With my husband. In the kitchen I cooked in for 11 years. On the 3rd day, something went cold in me, not hard, not bitter, cold, the way a fever breaks, that specific release. The way your hands finally adjust when you've been holding something very hot for a very long time. I stopped being the woman who was trying to hold 2 truths at once, the truth of what they'd done and the story I'd been telling myself about who they were. I let the story go. And I made a decision. I had one more thing to do before the birthday dinner. I needed to look Carla in the face and find out who she really was. Whether she told herself a story that made her the tragic heroine of something beautiful, or whether she knew, somewhere underneath, exactly what she'd been doing. That answer mattered. Not because it would change what I'd decided, but because I needed to know who I'd actually lost. So I texted her, "Can we get coffee this week? Just us." Her reply came in 4 minutes, a smiley face. "Yes, Thursday works." The exclamation point, my sister and her exclamation points. She'd been using them since 7th grade and never thought to stop. She thought it was a sister's coffee. She was probably already deciding what to order. She had no idea it was the last conversation we'd ever have where she felt safe. The night before coffee with Carla, I confronted David. I chose the timing deliberately. After dinner, when the kitchen was clean and there was nowhere to go and no reason to leave, I set my phone on the table between us, face up, screenshots already pulled. And I said, "Tell me about your Tuesdays." 4 words. I'd practiced them. I watched his face do the math. I saw the exact moment he arrived at the lie, a fraction of a second, but I'd been watching his face for 14 years and I knew all its textures. He didn't reach for confusion. He went straight to calm. That told me everything. Not a question, a test. Checking how much I knew before he decided what to offer me. I turned the phone around. "Here's what I want you to understand about the moment you finally show someone what you know. You spend the days before it expecting one of 2 things, denial or remorse. You prepare yourself for both. What you do not prepare for is management, the smooth, almost professional quality of a person who has clearly, at some level, rehearsed for this. He didn't deny it, he managed it, how it looks. He said that, as if I had walked in on a photograph and misread the image. As if the evidence were a matter of interpretation and I simply needed someone to explain it to me. I want you to hear what just happened. He reached for the most generous impulse I had ever acted on. My genuine hope that the 2 people I loved most would love each other, and turned it into the mechanism of my own betrayal. He found the thing I was most proud of and used it against me. "You're the one who encouraged us." "Did she tell you she loves you?" I said. It wasn't a question, it was a door I was opening and waiting to see what walked through. He paused. For 2 full seconds, he paused. Nothing physical happened. I've thought about this phrase many times since that night, about what it assumes. It assumes the betrayal is located in the body, that everything that matters is physical, the touch, the contact, the absence of space between 2 people, that everything else, the good mornings, the voice notes, the 47 Tuesdays, the soulmate, the laughing at me while I grew his child, that all of it is somehow not the real thing, not the part that counts. "You called me exhausting," I said. There it is. The phrase that abusers and people who know they've done something wrong keep in the same drawer, always ready. Out of context. I had 3 years of context. I had 43 restaurant receipts in 11 pages and a $3,000 transfer from our savings and a voice note count I never got to hear. "Where did the $3,200 go?" I said, a different kind of pause this time, longer. Something moved behind his eyes, a quick calculation, trying to figure out what I actually knew versus what I was guessing at. He didn't answer, a whole thing. $3,200 from the account we called the future, given to the woman he told he couldn't lose, and he hadn't wanted to make it into a whole thing. Because making it a whole thing would have required saying Carla's name in a context that made the shape of everything visible. I looked at him across the table. I thought about the morning 2 years ago when we'd opened that savings account together, deliberate about it, choosing it as the place we'd put something every month that was meant to outlast us. I thought about the specific weight of that. And then I thought about $3,200 leaving it without a word. And then he said the thing I will never stop hearing. He wanted to keep her. He was sitting across from his pregnant wife, holding the evidence of 3 years of secret lunches and soulmate texts and hidden money and laughing at her ultrasound. And his negotiating position, that's what it was, a negotiation, was that he should get to keep them both. He looked at me. I looked at him. I looked at this man I'd built 14 years with, this man who'd sat in a hospital hallway for 3 nights for my father, and I understood something with total clarity. He was not sorry. He was sorry I knew. I stood up. I picked up my phone, and I said very quietly, "Okay." He heard surrender. I could see it. The small release of tension in his shoulders, the almost exhale. He heard, "She's overwhelmed and she's going to process this and we'll find a way through." He had absolutely no idea what I'd just decided. I went to bed. He came to bed an hour later. I lay in the dark and I listened to him fall asleep, and I made a mental list of everything I needed to do before Sunday. It was a long list. It felt completely manageable. Before I fell asleep, I thought about the money. $3,200 from our future given to the woman he called his soulmate on a Tuesday. I decided I'd mention that at the birthday dinner too. Tomorrow, I was going to find out who Carla really was. The coffee shop was her idea for a location, technically. She'd suggested it when I said somewhere easy for you, and she picked the place near her apartment, the one with the mismatched chairs and the lavender latte she'd been photographing for her Instagram for 2 years. She was already there when I arrived. Early even, which wasn't like her. She had her coat still on and her hands wrapped around a cup, and she was smiling at me across the room with the specific warmth of a person who has convinced herself that everything is fine, that she is fine, that we are fine. I sat down across from her and ordered a water and let her talk first. She talked for a while. About her week. About a show she'd been watching. About the nursery colors she'd been looking up for me. She had a whole photo saved. She pulled it out, all these shades of pale green and cream. "For the baby," she said. I thought it would be nice. "For the baby." I looked at the photo. I said, "That's nice." I handed the phone back, and then I put my own phone on the table between us, face up, screenshots pulled. The same 4 Marisol had sent me, plus 3 I'd captured from David's phone. I watched her face. There are faces you know so completely you could draw them from memory. The way they move, the muscles underneath, the specific geography of a person's expressions. I had been reading this face for 35 years. I knew every version of it. What I saw first was the panic. Immediate, involuntary, the kind the body can't prevent. Then, and this was the part I needed, something else, a decision. I watched her decide how to respond. I watched her choose. "Elena," she said. She looked, long enough to know I had everything. Long enough to understand this was not a bluff, not a confrontation built on suspicion. This was built on evidence. Then she looked up at me and she started to cry. I want to tell you something true about that cry. It was real. The tears were real. I know her face. I know when her tears are real. She was genuinely distressed. But here's what I've learned about distress. It isn't the same as remorse. A person can be deeply, authentically upset about being caught without feeling genuinely sorry about what they did. She said, "I'm so sorry. I love you. It wasn't, we never, I love you, Elena." I waited. "You have to know it didn't mean anything," she said. And here's where I found out who she was. Because I said, "It meant enough for you to call him your soulmate." And she stopped crying. Not all the way. The tears kept coming. But something behind the tears changed. She said that to me. "I can't help what's real." That's all I was. The woman who said she was his soulmate. The woman who counted their Tuesdays. The woman who described me as exhausting while I was growing his child. That's all I was. I sat with that for a moment. The half-second of silence was its own answer. She looked at the table. For the first time in that conversation, she looked genuinely ashamed. Not of the affair, of the money, which told me something about her hierarchy of guilt. She didn't answer. She was crying again, fully now. "I know you do," I said, and I believed it. That's the thing that took the longest to make peace with. She did love me. You can love someone and still take from them. You can love someone and still make yourself the center of a story that was never supposed to be yours. Love is not the same as loyalty. I confused them my whole life. I picked up my phone and put it in my bag. She looked at me. What does that mean?" There was a long pause. She was still crying, but it had gotten quieter, the specific quiet of someone who has run out of arguments and is just sitting inside the reality of what they've done. Then she said something that I've turned over many times. She said, "I never meant for it to be about replacing you." I looked at her for a moment. I thought about what it meant that she'd chosen that framing, replacing, when the word I would have chosen was betraying. Replacement is accidental. Betrayal is chosen. And she just told me, in that one word, how she'd been telling herself the story. "I know," I said, and I stood up, and I put on my coat, and I walked out. The cold hit me at the door. March, the particular cold of it, the kind that's almost over but not quite, that has ice in it still even when the sun is out. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and let it land on my face. Behind me, through the glass, I could see Carla still at the table, hands around her cup, not moving. I didn't look for long. I turned and walked to my car. I sat in it for 10 minutes before I started the engine, not crying, not angry, just sitting in the silence with the particular knowledge that you've done the thing you needed to do, and there's no taking it back now, and you're not sure you'd take it back even if you could, and that's both a relief and a weight at the same time. I started the car. I drove home. I had a birthday dinner to plan. The 2 days between the coffee shop and Sunday were the quietest of my life. David was in the house, but not fully in it, present at dinner, sleeping in the bed, existing in the rooms we shared, but the space between us had changed shape permanently, and we both knew it, and neither of us said so. He thought I was still in a fragile truce. He thought my stillness was resignation. It wasn't. It was focus. I made a list. Not dramatic, practical. What I would read and in what order. Where I would stand at the table. How I would hold the phone so the screen faced outward. How to keep my voice level when I reached the harder messages. I practiced in the bathroom with the door locked, speaking quietly to the mirror. David says it too, even and clear, not performing grief, not performing anger, just a fact being stated by the person to whom it was stated. That was all it needed to be. My mother's birthday was that Sunday. It had been on the calendar for weeks. The whole family, my aunts, my cousins, a few people from the neighborhood who'd been coming to my mother's birthday dinner since before I was born. The kind of gathering that takes 2 days to prepare for and half a day to clean up after. I almost canceled. I want to be honest about that. There were 2 or 3 days where the easier path was very clear to me. The easier path was call the lawyer, file the paperwork, remove myself from the situation with as much dignity as possible and as little collateral damage to the people around me. Handle it quietly. Handle it the way women are told to handle things, privately, gracefully, with the kind of restraint that keeps everyone else comfortable at the expense of the woman doing the restraining. I am 38 years old. I have been graceful. I have been restrained. I have turned the music up so nobody heard the ugly thing happening in the next room. I have filed things under categories that protected other people's feelings at the cost of my own clarity. Then I thought about one specific screenshot. The one where Carla wrote, "Elena's in her own world. She doesn't notice anything anymore." They had built the whole thing on one assumption, that I wasn't paying attention. That I was soft enough to absorb it, foolish enough not to see it, and conflict averse enough to let it pass even if I did. They were not entirely wrong about me. But they were wrong about what I'd do when the proof was in my hands. The Sunday gathering wasn't going to be revenge. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about something more specific. It was about correcting the record in front of the people whose love I was not willing to live inside of falsely. My mother deserved to know what was in her house. My father deserved to know what kind of man had spent the night in his hospital waiting room. I cooked all day Saturday. The lasagna my grandmother taught me. The kind that takes 3 hours and uses real bechamel and needs to rest overnight. I made it like I always made it, from memory, because I've been making it since I was 14 years old. There's something specific about cooking a meal you know by heart. You don't have to think about it. Your hands know the steps and your mind is free to go somewhere else entirely. And where my mind went while the bechamel thickened and the pasta softened and the whole house filled with the smell of something real being made was not toward David or Carla or what I was about to do. It went to my grandmother. She had taught me this recipe in this exact kitchen 12 years ago, standing at this exact stove. She'd been specific about everything. The amount of nutmeg, the heat level for the sauce, the way you need to trust the process even when it looks like too much liquid too soon. She'd said, the secret is you don't rush it. You can't rush bechamel or it breaks. I had not rushed anything. I set the table Sunday morning with the good plates. I polished the silverware with a cloth the way my mother had taught me. I arranged the centerpiece. The glass vases I only brought out a few times a year, with the white flowers from the market on the corner. I was deliberate about all of it. Each plate placed exactly. Each glass positioned the same distance from the edge. I curled my hair. I put on the dress my mother always said was the one she'd pick if she could wear my clothes. A deep green, simple, the kind of dress that says I made an effort without announcing it. When David came into the kitchen that afternoon and found me calm and composed and making something that smelled like every good family dinner we'd ever had, he stood in the doorway for a moment. "You seem better," he said. "I've had some time to think," I said. He relaxed. I watched it happen, the small, almost imperceptible settling of tension in his body. He'd spent the week waiting for the other shoe to drop, and here I was, making lasagna and smelling like his wife, and everything was fine. "I'm glad," he said. He went to get dressed. I checked the oven. And I thought, that relief you're feeling right now, that ease, that is the last gift I'm ever going to give you. They started arriving at 4. My mother came first. She lived 20 minutes away and always arrived early because she had never in her life trusted that the event would happen correctly without her being there to see it start. She hugged me at the door and held on for a little longer than usual and said, "You look beautiful, baby." And I said thank you, and I meant it, and I led her to the kitchen where the lasagna was resting and everything smelled warm, and she said, "Oh, you made Grandma's," and her face did that thing it does when something connects her to someone she misses. My father came with her. He kissed my forehead. He has never been a man of many words, and that has always been enough. The aunts and cousins arrived in a cluster. The particular chaos of my mother's family, everyone talking at the same time, children appearing from somewhere, coats being piled on the bed in the guest room. My cousin Renata was there, the one who'd asked about the Italian restaurant at dinner months ago. She hugged me, asked about the pregnancy, put her hand on my stomach without asking, the way people do, and I smiled. Carla arrived 20 minutes after everyone else. She came alone. She'd texted to say she was coming, and I'd read it and not replied. When she appeared in the doorway, she looked like she hadn't slept. She'd done her makeup carefully. More carefully than usual, I thought, the way you do when you're trying to put something together that feels like it's coming apart. She was wearing the perfume I'd given her for Christmas. She hugged me at the door. "You look amazing, sis," she said. "Thank you," I said. I meant nothing by it at all. David arrived with the wine a few minutes after that. He and Carla did the thing they did, the greeting that was just a touch too normal, too easy. They said hello to each other the way strangers do, careful and brief, and then moved apart, and I noted it the way I'd been noting everything for 3 weeks, quietly, completely, with full retention. We ate. 22 people around my father's table, and the lasagna was good, and the wine was poured, and my Aunt Rosaria told the story about the summer her husband tried to fix the car himself and accidentally set the driveway on fire. Everyone laughed, even me. Even genuinely, because it is a good story, and because laughing with people you love, even in the middle of knowing what you know, is its own kind of grace. My cousin's youngest daughter, 4 years old, all opinions and no volume control, announced loudly that she didn't like the pasta because it was wet, which made the table erupt. My mother laughed until she had to put her fork down. David poured more wine for the adults within reach. Someone passed the bread a second time. It was, by any external measure, a beautiful dinner. I was watching everything. Someone mentioned a name, an old neighbor, someone my parents had known for 20 years who'd recently moved somewhere warmer. My mother asked if anyone had heard from them. A few people had. There was a small detour into news about people only half the table knew, the specific sideways orbit of family conversation. I watched Carla across the table. She was performing very well. She was asking questions, laughing at the right moments, keeping her wine glass at a careful pace. She was doing exactly what I'd done for years, being present in a way that was actually managed, holding something back behind the face she'd decided to show. I recognized the technique. I'd invented it, sitting across from her at dinner for 35 years, and I watched David and Carla not look at each other. This is the part I want you to understand, because it sounds like nothing and it was everything. They'd clearly agreed. At some point, before the dinner, in whatever conversation they'd had about what I'd confronted David with, they'd agreed to be visibly normal with each other, no moments. No eye contact that lasted a beat too long, no private exchanges. But you can't agree not to have an instinct. And twice during dinner I caught it, a tiny, involuntary pull. David saying something funny and starting to glance in her direction before stopping himself. Carla starting to laugh and then looking toward where he was seated for just a fraction too long before redirecting to someone else. They were trying so hard not to look at each other that it was its own kind of looking. My mother told the story about the time I got lost at the county fair. I was 7, she said. I had chased a dog who'd gotten loose from somewhere, and by the time she noticed I was missing, she'd been in a full panic for 20 minutes before they found me 3 booths away, feeding the dog a funnel cake I talked a stranger into buying me. The table laughed. I laughed too. I actually had, at some point, forgotten this story, and hearing it again was genuinely warm. I felt, for just a moment, the grief of it. Not for the marriage, not even for Carla, quite yet. For the particular warmth of being in a room full of people who know you at every age at once, people who carry the version of you at 7 alongside the version of you at 38. That warmth was real. I wasn't going to burn it down. I was just going to make sure everyone in this room knew the truth about what was inside the house we were all sitting in together. The plates cleared. My mother was mid-story about something else now. My cousin was refilling glasses. The candles were down to an inch, dripping steadily onto the silver holders. I stood up. The sound of the chair was small, but in families, movement changes the air pressure. People looked up. I want to read something, I said, out loud, so everyone hears it the same way I did. My mother started to raise her glass. She thought it was a toast. Across the table, David's fork stopped. Carla set down her wine. I scrolled to the first message, the one from a Tuesday in March, sent at 2014 in the afternoon. I read his name. I read her name. And I began. I read the first message, the one about him being the only person who actually gets her. I read it in the same voice I use when I'm reading something at work. Level, clear, every word given its correct weight. My mother's face changed. Slowly, like a photograph developing, you could watch the image arrive. I read the lunch caption. It's just ours. I read the word soulmate into a room full of the people who'd watched me grow up. Carla stood up. Her chair scraped. It fell back and hit the floor, and she didn't even turn to look at it. I looked at him. I kept reading. I read the one where Carla described me as being in my own world. I read, out loud, in my own steady voice, the message where my husband told my sister about watching me cry at the sight of my child's heartbeat on a screen, and the laughing emoji she sent back. The room went through several kinds of silence before it arrived at the real one. The first silence was confusion. The second was understanding. The third was the specific quiet of people who have heard something they cannot unhear and are now rearranging everything they thought they knew. My aunt had both hands over her mouth. My cousin Renata, who'd asked about the Italian restaurant, who'd watched them not look at each other across a dinner table 8 months ago, looked at David with an expression I couldn't fully translate, like she was seeing something she'd have seen before and was furious with herself for not saying something sooner. Carla was crying. The loud kind. The kind that demands to be answered. She's always cried that way, since she was little, the full-body version, the kind that fills a room. She looked around the table for someone to rescue her, for someone to be on her side, for someone to say, "Stop, that's enough, this is too much," and here is what 35 years of being the strong one taught me. I knew that look. I had answered that look more times than I could count. Every thunderstorm, every heartbreak, every 11 p.m. knock on my apartment door. This time, I just watched it. "Tell them it's not true," my mother said to Carla, quietly. Her voice was very quiet, the voice you use when you're asking for something you're terrified not to get. Carla said nothing. She grabbed her bag from the back of her chair. She walked to the door. The screen door banged once. Twice. And then she was gone, leaving her own birthday cake on my counter, the one she'd been texting me about for 2 weeks, the chocolate one from the bakery on 5th that my mother loves. David stood up. He straightened his shirt. This is the detail I remember most. That before he spoke, he straightened his shirt. The practiced composure of a person about to do damage control. He turned to the room. I had not raised my voice. I had not cried. I had not thrown anything or broken anything or said a single word beyond what I'd read from those messages. The only people who had made any kind of scene at my table were the two of them, one who had run, one who was spinning, and everyone at that table could see it. My father stood up, my quiet father, the man who never raises his voice, who went through a whole cardiac event without complaining once, the man who sat in a hospital hallway for 3 nights. He said 2 words to David. David got out. I sat back down at the head of my table. I finished my water. The candles were burning down. Someone, my aunt, I think, said something soft that I didn't catch. My mother was crying quietly with her napkin pressed to her face. Renata was looking at her phone, I found out later, texting her husband, who knew David from a work connection and was going to have some conversations of his own. For a long moment, nobody moved. The table held what had just happened, and nobody knew yet how to hold it gracefully. Then my father very quietly put his hand on my shoulder. Just for a second, he didn't say anything, he just put his hand there and then removed it. That was his whole contribution to the moment. It was enough. My Aunt Rosaria stood up and started clearing plates. This is what people in my family do when things become too large to talk about. They start moving. They make order. She didn't say anything either. She just picked up the plates with both hands and carried them to the kitchen and came back and picked up more. Slowly, the table unfroze. People started talking again in quiet voices, not about what had happened, about other things, the way families do. You acknowledge the earthquake and then you talk about whether anyone needs more water, because life contains both and you have to get through the evening somehow. At some point, Renata appeared at my shoulder and put her hand on my arm and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing. My Aunt Rosaria, on her second pass clearing plates, put a hand briefly on my head as she walked behind me. Not a pat, not comfort exactly, just a touch that said, "I see you, I am here." My father's sister, who had never said more than 20 words to me in a row in my entire life, caught my eye from across the table and nodded once. That nod. I've thought about it many times since that night. It was the specific nod of a woman who has her own version of the story, filed away somewhere, never told, who recognized in what I'd done something she wished she'd had the chance to do herself. I didn't know her story. I still don't. But I received that nod completely. My mother stopped crying. She dried her face with the napkin and she looked at me across the table, and there was something in her face I hadn't been expecting. Not pity, not shock. Pride. She looked at me with something that was very close to pride, and then she said, "Do you want me to stay tonight?" I said no, I was fine. She stayed anyway. She did the dishes while I sat at the table and let myself be still. She made tea. She knew I wouldn't drink, but that she needed to offer. She moved through my kitchen in the way mothers move through their children's spaces, comfortably, purposefully, like she had a right to be there, which she did. My hands were not shaking. They still weren't. The text started at 9,047 p.m. I know because I was washing the good plates when my phone lit up on the counter. The good plates take longer to wash. You have to be careful with the gold rim. No soaking, no steel wool, nothing abrasive. You wash them one at a time with warm water and dish soap and a soft cloth, the way my mother taught me. It's the kind of task that requires just enough attention to keep your hands occupied and not quite enough to keep your mind from going wherever it needs to go. My phone lit up and I kept washing the plates. Carla first. 11 messages, arriving in a cluster, the way she texts when she's feeling something at full volume. "I'm so sorry. It wasn't what it looked like. You're my sister. I would never hurt you on purpose. Please don't tell people. Please call me. I can explain everything. You don't understand the whole story. Please. You ruined my life. How could you do this to me in front of everyone?" I dried the first plate and set it on the rack and picked up the second one. Read that last message again. I've read it so many times since then that the words have gone strange and specific in my mind. How could you do this to me? As if I were the author of her words. As if the act of reading a sentence is worse than the act of writing it. As if the mirror is more guilty than the person standing in front of it. She had ruined her own life. She had been ruining it in slow motion for 3 years, one Tuesday at a time, and she had never once come to me and said, "I need to tell you something." She had not loved me enough to give me that, but she loved herself enough to be furious that I'd finally said it out loud. David's messages were calmer. They came an hour later, after he'd been driving or sitting somewhere and deciding on his approach. His were always calmer. It was one of the things I used to love about him. "We need to talk about this like adults. You overreacted. I understand you're upset, but this was a misunderstanding. Think about the baby. Think about what you're doing to this family. I still love you. I have always loved you. Nothing happened. You're throwing away 14 years over a feeling. 14 years. He kept returning to the number, the way people return to the largest thing they can point to when the smaller things have all fallen away. Like if you keep saying the number out loud, it becomes a debt the other person owes you. Like time spent is the same thing as love kept. I didn't answer either of them. I finished the dishes. I wrapped the birthday cake in foil and put it in the refrigerator because I wasn't going to throw away a perfectly good chocolate cake over the people who'd left it behind. I wiped down the counter. I folded the dish towel the way I always folded it, in thirds, over the handle of the oven. A small, ordinary thing. I did it on purpose. I turned off the kitchen light. The house was very quiet. The specific quiet of a house from which the complication has been removed. Not an empty quiet, a clean one. I walked through my living room in the dark and I thought about all the Sunday evenings I had spent in this house being lucky, believing I was lucky, and I let myself feel the weight of that, not with anger. Anger would come later in smaller, more manageable waves. Right now it was just the weight. I thought about who had sat on this couch, who had eaten at that table, who had put their coffee mug in that specific spot on the counter for 11 years because it was the spot nearest the window and the window had the best morning light. All those ordinary accumulations of a shared life, and underneath them, quietly running parallel, a whole other set of accumulations I hadn't been allowed to see. I sat on the couch for a while. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't call anyone. I just sat in my own house, in my own quiet, with my hands in my lap, and I thought about who I was going to be now. I thought about my daughter. I was 7 months pregnant, and I was already pretty sure she was a girl, and I talked to her sometimes when the house was quiet, the way you do when you know someone is there even if they can't answer yet. I didn't say anything to her that night. I just sat with her, the way Carla once sat with me in a locked bathroom while I told stories to drown out the sound of things breaking. Someone has to be steady. I have always been that person. I was not going to stop now. On Monday morning, I called the lawyer. The real call this time. Not the one from the car. The preliminary one. The real one. I drove to her office and sat across from her at a desk that had 3 family photos on it and a plant that looked healthy in the way plants look healthy when someone actually pays attention to them. I laid out everything. The timeline I'd built. The screenshots. The bank records. The transfer from our savings. The coffee shop conversation with Carla. I talked for 40 minutes without notes because I'd been carrying all of it in my head for 3 weeks and it had organized itself there, chronological and clear. She listened. She asked 3 questions. Then she put down her pen. I almost laughed, because I know exactly why I kept the record. Because I am a woman who has spent her entire adult life being told she's too sensitive, imagining things, taking things too seriously, taking things out of context. When you hear that enough times, you start keeping proof. You do it without even knowing you're doing it. You do it because you've learned that a feeling, in the hands of someone who wants to dismiss you, is nothing. A record is something else entirely. We talked about the house. The mortgage was joint. The savings account was joint. The car, his, in his name, was not. We talked about the savings transfer, $3,200, taken without discussion. She made a note of that. We talked about the baby. In the careful way you talk about someone who hasn't arrived yet, but who is already the most important consideration in the room. About what the next months would look like. About what after looked like. Eventually, when things had settled into their new shape. She said, "These things take time. I want you to be prepared for that." I said I was prepared. The paperwork was filed on a Tuesday. I noticed that without intending to. The day they'd been counting. Our Tuesdays, their Tuesdays, was the day I started the legal process of separating my life from his. I don't think it meant anything, but I noticed it. What I was not prepared for was how quiet everything would be in the weeks that followed. David had moved to his brother's apartment by Wednesday. He didn't take much. Some clothes, his laptop, his specific coffee mug. He sent me a text that said, "I'm not giving up on us. This isn't over." I read it and set the phone down and thought about how strange it is that people use the language of hope when what they mean is, "I am not ready to face what this is." He called 3 times that first week. The voicemails were long. The first an explanation, the second an apology, the third a plea. I listened to all 3 in my car, parked in the driveway, and I thought about the voice notes in his phone I'd never been allowed to hear. His voice, going somewhere I wasn't allowed. And now, here it was in my voicemail, going somewhere he wasn't allowed. I saved all 3. The lawyer had said, "Keep everything." The house felt different without him in it. Not smaller, not sadder, just mine. Like a room after you moved the furniture and realized the space was always there, you just hadn't seen it clearly. I repotted a plant I'd been meaning to repot for 8 months. I rearranged the books in the bedroom. Small things. Not triumphant acts. Just the acts of someone figuring out what she wants in the space that used to be shared. The legal process was slower than I wanted and faster than I feared. My lawyer was thorough. She was the kind of person who communicated in clear, specific sentences without softening anything, which was exactly what I needed. She told me what to expect. She told me what the timeline looked like. She told me what my rights were regarding the savings transfer, the house, the arrangements for after the baby came. I took notes. I asked questions. I went home and added things to the spreadsheet. David negotiated through his lawyer, which meant I didn't have to talk to him directly. I found that arrangement easier than I expected. 14 years of knowing someone's voice and the specific weight of his silences, and it turned out I could end it all through exchanged documents and time-stamped emails. There's something both practical and heartbreaking about that. I've chosen to focus on the practical. He agreed to the house. That was the thing I needed most and the thing I was most afraid wouldn't happen. But the savings transfer worked against him, legally, and he knew it and he didn't fight it. The house my mother had nothing to do with building stayed in my name, the name it had always been in. I signed the document sitting at the kitchen table with my grandmother's plates on the shelf behind me and my daughter pressing against my ribs in a way that was starting to feel like impatience, and I thought, we're okay. We are actually going to be okay, Carla. I did not hear from directly after the 11th message. She went quiet, the way people go, quiet when they've run out of narrative, when every version of the story they've tried to tell themselves has stopped holding. My mother called me every day. She would say, Carla is going through a hard time, and I would say, I know. And there would be a silence between us that held everything we both understood and couldn't say yet. My mother is not a stupid woman. She saw what she saw at that table. She just needed time to let it settle into something she could carry. The baby was fine, healthy. The measurements were good, the heartbeat was strong, the appointments were routine. I drove myself to all of them. I parked in the garage where I'd called David and gotten voicemail months ago, and I thought, I'm going to stop marking things by what happened before and after. I'm going to start marking them by what I know now. The appointments were different alone, not sadder exactly, just different. The technician would ask if I had any questions, and I would ask the right questions and write down the answers in the small notebook I kept in my bag, and I would drive home and make dinner and sit with the information the way you sit with anything important, carefully, completely, giving it the attention it deserves. She was healthy. That was the only thing that mattered. She had been healthy through all of it, through the discovery and the 3 days and the confrontation and the coffee shop and the birthday dinner. She had been growing through all of it, steady and oblivious and entirely untouched by the way I was carrying. I found that remarkable. I still do. 6 weeks after the birthday dinner, my mother came to stay for a week. She arrived with food. 3 days of meals, all in containers, labeled in her handwriting. She didn't say much the first 2 days. She cooked, she watched television, she folded laundry that didn't need folding because she needed something to do with her hands while she thought. On the 3rd night, she came and sat across from me at the kitchen table. I should have seen it, she said. I looked at her. At this woman who made something out of nothing at the end of every month, who turned the music up when things got hard because she thought she was protecting me, and she didn't know she was teaching me, who raised me to be strong in all the ways that made me the last person anyone expected to be blindsided like this. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She had her mother's hands. I'd always known that, always noticed it, broad and capable, the hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime making things work. We sat like that for a while. She asked me eventually about Carla. She'd been building up to it for 3 days. I could tell. My mother looked at the table. Then she said something I didn't expect. I know what she did was wrong. I need you to know that. I know that. I'm not asking you to excuse it. I'm just asking you not to decide anything permanent while you're still in the middle of it. I looked at her. I thought about that for a long time after she went to bed. About doors. About the specific difference between a door you've chosen not to open and a door you've walked away from for good. About whether I even knew yet which one this was. My mother was right that I was still in the middle of it. She was also right that there was no rush to decide. What I knew was this: I wasn't angry at Carla the way I was angry at David. With David, the anger was clean and specific, the anger of someone who had made a promise and broken it in the most deliberate way. With Carla, it was messier, more grief than anger. The particular grief of someone who looked at the face they'd known their whole life and realized they'd been reading a different story in it than the one that was actually there. I think that's what made the coffee shop conversation so important. Not what she said, though what she said mattered, but the moment I watched her decide how to respond. The decision on her face. She had a choice in that moment about who to be, and she chose justification. She chose to make it about my focus, my lists, my being in my own world. And that choice told me more about who she was than 3 years of secret Tuesdays. Love, I've learned, is not the same as knowing someone. You can love a version of a person and never fully know the person underneath. I loved Carla. I loved a Carla who, it turned out, had been making different choices than the ones I'd assigned her in the story I told about us. That's not something you process quickly. I'm still processing it. Somewhere in the next week after my mother left, I started sleeping through the night. That surprised me more than anything. I had expected the nights to be the hardest part. The silence, the absence, the way a bed that was made for two feels too wide when it's just you. But what I found instead was that the bed felt like mine again. Not too wide, just mine. The first night I slept 8 straight hours. I woke up and lay there for a moment in the early morning, listening to the quiet, and I felt something I didn't have an immediate word for. I lay there finding it, turning it over, checking its edges. It was peace, not happiness. I wasn't there yet, and I knew it, and that was okay. Not relief exactly, though that was part of it. Just the specific quiet of a person who has stopped holding something that was very heavy and has put it down, finally, in a place where it belongs. I talked to my daughter that morning. I told her she was wanted. I told her she had been wanted for years, through all of it, through every disappointment and every bathroom floor and every appointment I drove myself to. I told her that whatever this looked like when she was old enough to understand it, what it looked like to me was, I found out the truth, and I told it. That's what you do. You tell the truth, and you keep going. I'm still keeping going. She was born on a Tuesday. I've thought about that more than once. My daughter, born on the day they made their own. A Tuesday in May, early in the morning, the light coming through the hospital windows in that specific pale way that makes everything look like a beginning. My mother was there. My father came within the hour. Renata drove 2 hours without being asked. Nobody from David's side came. That was fine. It was more than fine. I held her and I looked at her and I thought, here you are. Here is the person I've been talking to through all of this. She looked back at me with the expression all newborns have. That ancient, serious, entirely unimpressed look, like they've been somewhere far away and they're not sure yet whether this new place is worth the trouble. I told her, it is. It's worth the trouble. She has my grandmother's hands. I noticed that on the second day, the broad, capable shape of them, the specific curve. My mother saw it too and didn't say anything, just looked at me across the hospital room with something in her face that I knew how to read. She's going to be okay. You're both going to be okay. I want to tell you about the first night alone with her in the hospital room. The lights were low and she was asleep in the little plastic bassinet beside my bed, and the hospital was doing that thing hospitals do at night. The muted PA announcements, the soft footsteps in the hall, the particular hush of a building full of people trying to get through the night. I was exhausted in a way I had never been exhausted before, and I was completely, entirely at peace. I looked at her sleeping face, and I thought about the kitchen floor, the ice cream melting, the phone face down on the tile, the 22 minutes, all the things I had held and carried and documented and finally put down at a table in front of the people I loved. I thought, she will never know how close it came to being different. How different her start could have been if I had chosen quiet instead of truth. If I had done the thing I'd been trained my whole life to do, absorb it, file it away, smile through dinner, I chose differently. And she gets to begin in a house that is true. That's the thing I wanted her to have most. Not comfort, not ease, not a family that looks perfect from the outside. A life that starts in truth. That was always what I was working toward, even when I didn't know it yet. She's gonna be okay. We both are. We are. I used to think the worst part of what happened was what they did with their feelings. The secret lunches, the word soulmate, the voice notes I never got to hear. The counting of Tuesdays. I was wrong. The worst part was simpler than that. The worst part was the way they talked about me. The laughing. The she's exhausting. The she doesn't notice. The casual, comfortable cruelty of two people who had decided somewhere along the way that my contentment was a resource, that my trust was a gift they could accept without any obligation to protect it, that my belief in my own family was a blindfold they could borrow indefinitely. I was not blind. I was trusting. Those are not the same thing. I need you to hear that because for a long time after I found those messages, I struggled with the idea that I should have known, that a smarter woman, a more watchful woman, a less in her own world woman would have caught it sooner. I carried that for months. I've put it down now. The truth is, I was watching. I noticed every single thing, the coffee without being asked, the glance across the table at the Italian restaurant, the identical callback timing, the hot water heater detail. I noticed all of it, and I filed every piece of it under the most generous interpretation available because I love these people and I wanted to be wrong. That is not stupidity. That is not blindness. That is what love looks like when it's working honestly. They were counting on my love. They were living inside it, using it as a roof over their secret. And when I finally pulled it away, they had the audacity to act like I had done something to them. The dress they laughed at, I still have it. I wore it last month. The ultrasound they turned into a punchline, I have the photo from that morning. My daughter's heartbeat, that first one, still stored on my phone. I look at it sometimes, not with grief, with the particular knowledge that the most sacred things in your life are not made less sacred by the fact that someone else found a way to diminish them. They tried to make my love into a joke. My love is not a joke. They laughed at me crying at a heartbeat. My daughter is here now. She is real. She is the heartbeat they laughed at, grown into a person with her great-grandmother's hands and a serious ancient expression and a laugh that sounds like something breaking open in the best possible way. Every time I hear it, I think, this is what they couldn't touch. This is the part they thought was small. I'm not crazy. I have receipts, and I have peace. Here's what I want to say to you. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, not because your story is the same, it isn't. Everyone's story is specific and painful in its own particular geography. But if you've ever had that feeling, the small cold thing you refused to name, the moment you started keeping proof without knowing why, the way you smiled through dinner when what you actually knew would have shattered the table, then you know what I'm talking about when I say you were not imagining it. You are not in your own world. You see everything. You have always seen everything. You just made the most generous possible choice with what you saw, for as long as you could, because you loved people and you wanted to be wrong. Being right is a terrible gift, but it's still a gift. Because once you know the truth, really know it, document it and time-stamped and read out loud in your own voice at your own table, there is nothing left to manage, there is nothing left to absorb, there is nothing left to file away under a category that makes it hurt less. There is only, what do I do now? And what I did was, I kept going. Here is what nobody tells you about the moment you stop protecting the people who are hurting you. They tell you it will feel like freedom. Sometimes it does. But before it feels like freedom, it feels like standing in a field after a storm. Everything flattened, everything exposed. The air very clean and very cold, and the sky very wide and very open, and you're standing there with your hands at your sides and you're just there. Not running, not carrying anything. Just there. That's what it felt like. And then, slowly, over days and weeks and months that had the baby growing and the lawyers filing and the house staying mine and the plate staying on the shelf and the bechamel never breaking because I never rushed it. Over all of that, the field stopped feeling like devastation and started feeling like space. Room. Somewhere to put something new when I was ready. I'm not fully ready yet. I want to be honest about that. There are still mornings when I reach for a thought and find grief where I expected to find nothing. There are still moments when I see a Tuesday on the calendar and feel something tighten in my chest before I remind myself. Tuesdays are mine now, all of them. But the piece is real. It's not a performance. It's not a conclusion I'm performing for an audience. It's the specific feeling of having done the right thing even when it was the harder thing, of having told the truth when it would have been easier and quieter and safer for everyone except me to let it stay buried. I told the truth. At my own table, in front of the people I loved, I told the truth. And my hands did not shake. If this reached something in you tonight, leave it in the comments. I read every single one. You don't have to say much. Sometimes just I hear you is enough. Sometimes just knowing someone else has sat on a kitchen floor and looked at the ice cream melting and chosen, eventually, to get up. Sometimes that's what carries you through the night. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me what you've already done. Tell me what you're still figuring out. This channel exists because these stories deserve more than silence. Because the women in them, the ones who smiled through dinner and held it together and kept the truth in their chest for as long as they could, and then finally put it down, those women deserve to be heard. You are not alone in this. The silence they left behind is not as empty as it feels right now. I promise you, it's peace. All names and identifying details in this story have been changed. This story was created for the Silence Bonds channel and is inspired by real emotional experiences shared publicly. Any resemblance to specific individuals is coincidental.